Have you heard the term baby daddy before? If you have my sympathies. I think the term is both irritating and unfortunate. According to dictionary.com, a baby daddy is the biological father of a child, usually when he's not in a relationship with the mother and is not actively raising the child. The part of that definition that I want to focus on is where it says a baby daddy is not actively raising their child. And as the title of this video describes, I think there are such things as spiritual baby daddies. This message is about leaders and or pastors in the church leading others to salvation, but neglecting the growing and raising of the new Christians, the baby Christians. In a way, they lead others to be born again, but truly neglect helping to raise them into mature Christians. In the Bible, Jesus said, "Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey all that I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, even to the end of the age." And a disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. I want to bring attention to the fact that Jesus said to go and make disciples of all the nations. And in Luke chapter 6, verse 40, he says that a disciple is not above his teacher, but when fully trained, will be like his teacher. First of all, I find it interesting that we are to make disciples and not converts only. He said to teach them to obey all that he has commanded us. To me, this is speaking about teaching new Christians, which implies to me that growth is necessary after conversion. Furthermore, the part about a disciple not being above his teacher, but everyone, when they are fully trained, will be like his teacher. All I can say about that is that if leaders or pastors in churches are teaching others, why are the people being taught seemingly never up to par with them? For decades, they can attend the same church with the same pastor and still seem as if they are the students and the pastor is the teacher that they never measure up to at all. They are like perpetual students who do not grow to be like their teacher. And to be slightly cynical, maybe it's a good thing that they're not becoming like their teacher. But that's not the point I'm trying to make. My point is, at what point will they be like their supposed teacher? But perhaps this is illustrating something else, and that is that their leader, pastor, preacher person isn't much to write home about. And more than that, I would say they are neglecting their flock. They are like spiritual baby daddies. That sounds odd, but I'm being completely serious. There is something wrong in the typical American church when for years on end the same Christians can gather together. Each one of them is known by the pastor as professing Christians, and yet the pastor will still teach them that Jesus died for our sins and preach the gospel message to them. Preach the gospel message to Christians, to people who already believe. This is not the nourishment that the flock needs. They know the gospel message already. Help them to grow with something more than milk to feed on. So let us stop going over the basic teachings about Christ again and again. Let us go on instead and become mature in our understanding, Surely we don't need to start again with the fundamental importance of repenting from evil deeds and placing our faith in God. You don't need further instructions about baptisms, the laying on of hands, the resurrection of the dead, and eternal judgment. And so, God willing, we will move forward to further understanding. This is exactly what I see in many a church. The basic teachings about Christ being taught over and over and over again. It is like feeding milk to a toddler, and only milk, and expecting them to grow up strong and healthy. At some point, solid food is needed. This repetition of teachings in any other place or setting that I can think of outside of the church would seem insane. I cannot imagine going to something like 4th grade in elementary school and each year being taught the very same curriculum and that being normal. Imagine going to school for 10 years and every year you are taught 4th grade curriculum. It would be insane, and nobody would stand for it most likely. However, in the church, this is supposedly normal. Well, it's not normal, and I'm saying that it is neglect. Just like it is not normal that a man should father a child and neglect it by either not raising it at all or feeding it milk and only milk and expecting health and maturity in the child. If a father is neglectful or MIA, then let there be someone else to step in and raise the child. But I have seen instances where the neglectful father does not give up his position to someone who can do better. They cling to the position for themselves, for their own sake, not for the sake of the child. I don't mean to say that I have seen this with fathers in real life. I mean that I have seen this in church situations where the leader will cling to his position for himself, not because he is doing a good job at feeding the flock. And just a little off-script, postscript to a point I made earlier about the repetition of the gospel message being preached to people who already believe, to people who are already Christians, and I've observed the gospel message of salvation through faith in Jesus and the forgiveness of sins, the gospel message preached to people who already believe it. Just a little postscript to that thought is I was going to say reasoning, but I'll say the excuse for that behavior of doing that so that the one person, have you ever heard of this excuse? That the one random person that might be attending church can hear the gospel message. That one random person that may not be a believer, and so the entire sermon basically is preached for their behalf, one person that doesn't believe. And so that's why for years on end the gospel message is preached to people who already believe, and that being like some sort of valid reason for this behavior. I don't accept that, because if a pastor knew his flock, if they cared enough, they could pick out the person and go to them personally and preach the gospel message to them if they so wished. Furthermore, the entire sermon does not have to be about the gospel message. They can keep that towards the end, which I have seen some people do, and I'm okay with that. But when the entire sermon is the gospel message, and likely preached to an entire congregation of believers where there is no random person there, no random unbeliever there, that is neglectful to the flock, the needs of the flock, the needs of the people who already believe the gospel message, who you do not have to convince of the truth of the gospel message. Yes, so I just wanted to bring up that little postscript to the previous point I made, which is that I have more than once, more than twice, I have heard the excuse of that it is valid to preach a gospel message sermon because there might be one person listening who does not believe. That's fine. There are other methods of reaching that person. But what about all the faithful attendees who have gathered there already believing the gospel message? They have got themselves up out of their nice warm bed in the morning, have dragged themselves into church, no, not into church, into the church building, and have done so for years on end. That is neglectful to come to them and preach yet again the same gospel message they have heard since they were a little child. That is neglectful, and that's not normal, and it's not right. But I, brothers, could not address you as spiritual people, but as people of the flesh, as infants in Christ. I fed you with milk, not solid food, for you were not ready for it. And even now you are not yet ready, for you are still of the flesh. For while there is jealousy and strife among you, are you not of the flesh, and behaving only in a human way? For when one says, I follow Paul, and another, I follow Apollos, are you not being merely human? What then is Apollos? What is Paul? Servants through whom you believed, as the Lord assigned to each. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. He who plants and he who waters are one, and each will receive his wages according to his labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. More than one person can contribute to nurturing the growth of fellow Christians. It's just that in church leadership, I have often seen planting and little watering. Again, planting, let's say, the seed that is the gospel message, but when it takes hold and germinates, I see little watering of the new seedling. Spiritual baby daddies, not to be grotesque, but the planting of the seed, and then no raising of what was planted, or very little raising, comparative to neglect. Like I said before, it will be continued gospel messages preached to the person who is already converted, or basically nobody but the pastor being allowed to try to do some watering when we are gathered together in a church service. And in regard to what I just said about basically nobody but the pastor being allowed to try to do some watering when we are gathered together in a church service, not always. I have seen where the pastor will let other people speak. Not in every church, though, that's for sure. Some seem to have a stranglehold on the microphone and seem to really like to hear themselves talk and almost have a possessive hold on their congregation, like it's their church. And I don't think that's healthy. It's not their church, it's God's church. And if God chooses to speak or move through another part of his body that happens not to be the pastor on a given Sunday, the pastor should yield to what the Lord wants to do. And let someone else operate in the body instead of the one part always operating the one part. But I rarely see that. No, it's usually the pastor as the main person, or other I was going to say something really cynical, and maybe I should just say it. It's either the pastor or other extra special people, the extra special parts of the body that get to speak. And, for them to speak, they probably should be faithful attendees for at least 50 years and probably pass various background checks and have everything in their life known about them before they can speak to the church body at all. You know what I'm trying to say? It can be extremely filtered as to who gets to speak. And I think that's a sad thing, because you know what that means to me? It means that the Lord can't move the way he would like to unless it is through these specific people. When he has his multiple parts gathered together. Again, I'm this message is supposed to be about spiritual baby daddies, and yet here I am yet again, going back to this same running topic in several of my videos about the lack of the full expression of the body of Christ when we're gathered together. In regard to that, and I hope I won't be going off topic too much longer, but in regard to the more full expression of the body of Christ that is gathered together instead of the one part functioning, I have been surprised that some of the people in the congregation who you barely hear from at all, when you do engage with them and start talking about something, what I was surprised about is that they know more than you think they do. And why shouldn't they? Maybe they've been taught by God outside of church. I am surprised that the sheep, the ones that are like supposedly, a lot of them, well, I shouldn't even say a lot of them, they're treated as perpetual students. They may not be students, actually. It's as if they're treated as if they are perpetual students and never measuring up to, to the level of the pastor or whoever's the preacher person. That is the attitude that I have consistently observed. But when I have talked to some of them, had a little conversation with some of them, I'm surprised that they know more than you think they do. They're not stupid. Maybe sheep are stupid. Are sheep supposed to be stupid? I don't know. I've never had to work with sheep. Animals. But they're not stupid. A lot of the people in the congregation are not stupid, which emphasizes even more to me that they're ready for more. They don't need the gospel message again. In fact, I would like to hear from them. I would like to hear from them what they have to say and learn something from them. Because, as I said, I've been surprised that when I have engaged with some of them, the things they say, they are not stupid. They are not necessarily students. They have things to offer, and I just think it's sad that they cannot. They cannot, because they are not the pastor or the apparent extra special people who do get a chance at the microphone from time to time. In fact, to any pastors that might be listening to this, they might know more than you. You know that? They actually might know something that you don't know. And God bless the pastors who already know that. But I feel like some need to hear that. These people who are listening to you every Sunday, they might know more than you. And you know what? As a different part of the body that you are not, they have something to offer that you can't offer. Such as an ear cannot offer what the eye offers. A arm cannot offer what, I don't know, a nose can offer, simply because they're a different part. Not because you as a pastor are lacking necessarily, just because they're a different part. And I hope that that is more valued than it seems to be. I feel like many a pastor could hear that. The arrogance that I have observed in some pastors is some of the most... It makes me fear for them. Like, do they have no fear of God? It makes me scared for them that they can speak and carry on the way they do. You know, personally, as far as human nature goes, don't you think that if you found yourself behind the podium on a stage in front of people and you were talking to them, that you might be a little more careful about what you say? Maybe more careful than you would be if you were lounging around in your house with some buddies. Like, I think you should have consistency about what you speak, no matter where you are, at home, in public. But I'm just saying, human nature, you'd think you'd be a little more careful about what you're choosing to speak when you're standing in front of a group of people on stage. But no, these people, some of these leaders in churches, almost seem to not care about that, and they take the opportunity as more of a time to flaunt themselves or something, and be, I don't know, show that they lack some fear of God, I guess. And that's startling. I was listening. I had the misfortune of listening to the first minute or so of this sermon one day. And I don't know if this is how it goes where you attend church services, but this has been often is the case for the church services I have attended, where they will pick a passage of scripture, maybe an entire book of the Bible, and incrementally every Sunday go through a part of it. Like, I don't know, if you pick a book of the Bible like Galatians, let's say they can get through the first 15 to 20 verses in one Sunday of reading that and then talking about that. And each successive Sunday, we will go through the next group of verses from the same book, going through the book of the Bible that was chosen, let's say Galatians. So it's predictable what's coming up, right? It's predictable what the next sermon will be about to some extent. And so anyway, like I said, I had this misfortune of listening to this particular sermon, the first minute or so of this particular sermon before I decided to not listen anymore. The pastor, preacher person, he was going to divert that Sunday from the normally scheduled programming. You know, they might have been going through some book of the Bible, like I just explained, but this particular Sunday they were going to jump out of that pattern and talk about something else. So to preface this wild behavior, no, not wild behavior, that's not true. I was being sarcastic. To explain what was happening to the congregation is something along the lines of basically that they were not going to be continuing in the pattern of going through this book like they had been, but that they were going to talk about something else. And he said something like, first of all, bear with me. First of all, if you know me, not just from this video, but like several videos, I already have the sensitivity to the fact that one person gets to perform in a church service. One main person. Consistently one main person. When many parts are there, one main person. Okay? I don't like that. And I don't like it because I don't think that's how God intended it to be at all. Okay, so I already have this awareness of this dysfunction of how one person is the main guy every Sunday. Okay. Knowing that, going back to this sermon that I listened to for like 1 minute, they were going to talk about something else, not continuing the pattern of working through a book of the Bible. To preface that, this pastor, preacher person addressed his congregation saying something like that he was going to be talking about something else because sometimes it feels like you just gotta say something. Sometimes it feels like you just gotta say something. And so, like, that's why he was jumping to something else and not continuing this pattern of going through some book of the Bible. Sometimes you feel like you just gotta say something. Okay? Also, is this another attempt at obligatory humor in the beginning of a sermon? This obsession with trying to be funny? That's more like a tip for public speaking to me. That somehow integrated itself into church. But okay, sometimes it feels like you just gotta say something, okay? And he said something like, and because I'm the preacher, I get to do that. Followed by chuckling, followed by laughter, followed by, isn't that so cute and funny? That, sometimes you just feel like you gotta say something, and because I'm the preacher, I get to do that. It pissed me off. You know why? Because, like I said, if you know me from some of these videos, I have pointed out that I think it's a dysfunction that one main guy gets to talk and do whatever he does every Sunday. And this attempt at humor almost mocked the fact that because he's the preacher, he gets to say something. Because he's the preacher, he gets to say something, and ha ha ha, isn't that so funny because all you sheep out there sure don't get a chance. All you sheep out there sure don't get a chance, but because I'm the preacher, I do. And it pissed me off, and I ceased from listening to this sermon. And where was I going with this? I am just surprised at the lack of fear of God. But then part of me is like, I think that they don't even know. I think that they don't even know what they're saying. And so how can I even be mad? Because they just might be ignorant. They just might be ignorant. They don't know. Nevertheless, I think some pastors need to hear that there are some things that their congregants know that he doesn't know, and that it would be wise to be a little more humble and not think you're the main guy. Not think that you're the main guy. In an arrogant sort of way, and not just in attitude only, but in action. In action, open up a time for other people to be the part of the body that they are while they're gathered together. Some potatoes were planted in the garden this year. Like potatoes usually seem to do, they initially grew very easily and very well. However, weeds were allowed to grow alongside them, and this stunted the growth of the potatoes and kept them from receiving water as well as they could have. What I'm trying to get at is, you don't just plant something and then neglect it if you expect it to grow well and if you care. It's an interesting thing that I've noticed, this pressure to make converts and not so much attention to the raising of them. Have you observed how a thing can not be ready yet? How a thing can not be ready yet? It could be something as simple as boiling a potato and it not being cooked yet. It's not ready yet. It needs more time. Or like a child not yet being ready to learn how to drive a vehicle. I would say a 3-year-old is not yet ready to learn how to drive. It reminds me of a story that my dad told me of when he was quite young and going to church services in the 1970s. There was the opportunity for him to join a street preacher who would go preach the gospel on some sidewalk in the city. My dad did take this opportunity and joined the street preacher. However, looking back, my dad was not prepared. He wasn't ready. Because of this pressure to make converts, like I mentioned before, the mindset was like, one day you are converted, and the next day you should be out there preaching the gospel. There was not much consideration to if a person was remotely mature enough to do this. It just seemed like the thing to do, since the goal of making converts can seem like almost the only thing for Christians to do. Like that is all the Christian is really to do. Spread the gospel. Am I saying we should not spread the gospel? No, I am not saying we should not spread the gospel. My point is, spiritual growth is also a thing for Christians to do. Becoming mature is also a thing for Christians to care about and give attention to. Making disciples, not converts only. Raising a child, not just planting your seed. Can a woman forget her nursing child or lack compassion for the son of her womb? Even if she could forget, I will not forget you. That was referring to the Lord. He will not forget you. Though the church is often not what it should be, God Himself will feed you, build you up. He will be your supply as a well of water. Where church leadership is failing, He will not. He knows what His sheep need. He will work through His receptive and obedient ones. The ones resistant, proud, stubborn will be left behind as something remarkably out of date. Not in an attractive way, like an antique, but in an unattractive way. Something that one has no use for anymore. Not useful, inadequate. The lukewarm, unbelieving believers that seemed passable for so long will not cut it anymore. And really, this is a good thing. It will come with the pressures of the times, the changing of the times. Like newspapers, they are slow. They don't do anymore. I mentioned that God Himself will feed you, build you up, be your supply. That's what He did and does for me. The years I did not attend a church service were so far, the years I learned the most from the Lord, one-on-one. The things I learned from the Lord, I would never have learned in a church service. Many of the things the Lord taught me, I have never heard taught in a church service. Where the church is failing, He will not. From late 2015 to 2017 particularly, and on through to 2019, I was taught intensely by the Lord. At that time, due to an injury, I was laid up quite a lot and did very little but spend time studying, writing, and listening to the Lord. I could not physically engage in my normal activities, so that time was especially used by the Lord to teach me. This teaching and training by Him have continued and is still intense at times, just in a somewhat different way since I have regained my physical abilities. I'm doing more things than I was during that time, since I'm not laid up like I was. But during several of those years, I did not attend a church service, and I learned more than I ever would have imagined. The church body is important, and I'm not saying to neglect meeting together, but I do not think the typical Sunday church service is really the same as benefiting from gathering together with a group of believers. I hope you understand what I mean. I do not think the structured format of a church service is really the same as gathering more naturally with a group of believers without that restrictive, traditional church service structure. Also, I do not look at church services as my source. I look to God as my source. Truly, it would be a frightening thing to view a church service as where you are most spiritually fed and nourished, taught, and built up. I'm not trying to be unkind to those faithful leaders and pastors who do a good job at feeding God's sheep. I'm saying God is my primary source for being spiritually fed and nourished, taught, and built up, not a church service. One day during my prayer time with the Lord, where I was listening for His voice, I believe He let me know a few things about how He personally has taught me. I will share with you what I believe He said to me because I think you can learn something from it. I will just read it to you like I wrote it down when I heard it from Him. I'm not going to edit it. This is what I believe He said to me. There is a reason I did not raise you in man's church culture, beloved. I did not want you molded by it, tainted by it, both mold as in formed by it, and mold as in decayed by it. I wanted to mold you and bring you up myself, and I have been, and I will continue to. I do not entrust you to man and his ideas of religious ways, just as some parents do not entrust their children to public schools for their education. Indoctrinated. I will bring you up myself before I entrust you to the typical church environment, my dearest. I decided this long ago. I want some for myself, not a product of man's church. A product of man's church must unlearn many things to walk the way I walked. You have my imprint, and I am keeping it that way. Protecting you, keeping you for myself, my very own and no one else's. I have decided this, dearest. I love you so. I know you. I know your heart. I know your belief and faith and care and effort and time and forbearance and fortitude and perseverance and endurance. I know these attributes I've been building in you. Know that the enemy desires to break down every one of these traits and every trait in my own that resembles me. He does not want these traits in any of my soldiers. He is most happy to have infant Christians instead of trained soldiers. Beloved one, he really doesn't care if a Christian does the Christian protocol of praying unbelieving prayers, filling their minds with biblical knowledge, singing hymns, and attending the man church show, if they just stay there and remain infants. This is no threat to him at all. But it is different if one of mine is growing, maturing, becoming ever more like me. There is a major difference here, my child. Know that the enemy opposes the one who is a threat to him especially. Daughter, I am sad to say that many a Christian is harmless enough, and even the enemy himself would say so. They are not soldiers, they are infants, even 70-plus-year-old infants. This is not my desire, but it is true. That's the end of that segment of what I heard from the Lord. Moving on, one Sunday morning I was sitting in a church service. Something was said about missionaries serving or deployed to various countries. Examples could be missionaries serving somewhere in Africa or Russia or South America, etc. I thought to myself, what about some missionaries being sent to the United States? I was a little cynical in this thought, but at the same time, I was serious. Seems to me we here in the United States could use some discipleship and teaching that helps us mature into Christian soldiers, so to speak, instead of being like newborns in the faith. I'm not so impressed with the spiritual condition of our country that I think we don't need missionaries here. Since around 2017 or 2018, I began attending church services regularly. It has not been easy for me, personally. I see too much for me to be naive about what is going on and enjoy the bliss of ignorance. I often wonder why I even go to church services. Almost every single concept I hear taught or talked about in a church service is something I already knew. Personally, it is just not typically a place where I feel fed. It is a place where I feel like I'm pouring out more than I am being poured into. And at this time, that is my reasoning for going to church services, that it is a place for me to serve. I do not go thinking that I'm going to get. I have come to understand this. It is just that at times this gets tiring. This gets tiring, to say the least, and I don't think it's just like physically tiring. I think it's spiritually tiring. Spiritually tiring to see what is happening, see the condition of things, and to do my best to hold on to the truth that I know, as well as trying to function somewhat in the structure of a church service, and at the same time still praying and having hope that there can be growth. It can be very tiring. It can be very tiring and very challenging for me to attend church services. Again, one morning during my prayer time with the Lord, as I was listening for His voice, I believe I heard from Him some words in regard to this. This is what I believe He said to me, unedited by me. I know you are tried every Sunday by what happens at church. I know what you endure, mine. I know you wonder what you're doing at church. Mine, I don't have you so tightly placed there that you can't leave. I know what it takes out of you. Mine, don't expect for yourself to grow spiritually from your attendance there. Not to inspire pride in you, daughter, but I have already advanced you farther than the pastor or the deacons there, on my own. This is not an advanced class for you. If anything, my own, your presence there I am using to grow and benefit others. So you hear it from me, beloved, so you know. I don't mean you won't benefit in any way from being there, daughter, but I'm saying it is very much more an output for you than an input. I'm saying it plainly, my own. Your input is from me. This is how it is, daughter, particularly in a sickly church body, when the parts are not functioning. Even in a vibrantly healthy church, truly I am the source, but I must be your input more directly, dearest, when the church body is not functioning the way I intended. There is not that building up. There are too many in desperate need themselves, starving, too much to pour out or give to others. My sheep are stunted and starved. They need too much to give, or they do not know, or have been mistaught, are ignorant. There are several reasons for the condition of my church, dearest one of mine. Don't expect to be built up or fed by those who lack so much, or who are immature, or resistant to my ways. It is like expecting to be physically helped by an invalid. And not only an invalid, but when they are hardly given opportunity to help anyway. I see it, mine, and I have seen it since there ever was a church. These things are not new, my child. That is the end of that segment of what I believe I heard from the Lord. I'm not sure what else I can say. There are good and faithful leaders in churches. Thank God for them. I see spiritual baby daddies, too, in leadership positions in churches. They will account to the Lord for how they've cared for His sheep. If you want to grow and mature as a Christian, I would instruct you to build your personal relationship with God. I would spend time with Him alone in prayer, speaking to Him, and listening for His voice, too. Most relationship is built with Him in this place of communing one-on-one with Him, where no one else can see, and where titles do not impress Him, where it is just one of His own and Him, and they are there to be with Him, be in His presence. Not to get something, really, but to be with Him, enjoying the relationship they have with Him. Do they have one? Might be the question. As far as building one's personal relationship with God goes, I also try to include Him in things during the day when I'm doing stuff, like asking him questions during the day, mentioning something to him, and trying to be sensitive to anything he might be trying to tell me or get me to do. Kind of like how you would interact with a person who was with you. I confess it can exercise my faith to do this at times. To be taught by the Lord is a very valuable thing. I'll leave you with what I believe I heard from the Lord in regard to that, again, unedited by me. Beloved, the way I have brought you up, and am still bringing you up, is very valuable. No amount of money can purchase the way I've brought you up, and man cannot do it himself, or learn it from mere man. It is something I do, something I did and am doing. I decided it myself. I wanted this with you, daughter. I cannot do this with the proud and self-sustaining, not with ones that trust their mind over me, not ones that already know, not with the unchildlike. Those who think they are already grown will not be childlike. I know which hearts are receptive to me. I love you, dearest. I wanted you for myself, and you are. I'll never let you go. I love you, and you are mine. Be unafraid, dearest. I am with you, and I will never leave you. There is always something for each of mine to grow in, to become more like me, dearest. Don't let it trouble you. We will keep growing and progressing. Be at peace and follow me.